Welcome everyone to Introduction to Human Services. When you have completed this course, you, the student, will be able to identify the models of human service delivery. That means the different ways that human services are provided. You will be able to explain the definition, the purpose, and the role of the human service professionals. You will be able to describe how human services have changed over the time and what things have influenced how these services have changed. You will be able to explain and apply the ethical standards for human service professionals, and to describe how human service professionals work with other services and outside systems on behalf of clients. You will be able to demonstrate helping or working with others, and you'll be able to identify a variety of human service professional careers and their requirements. Well, why do we even have human services? Very simply, people have problems. It's a natural state for all human beings. And these problems don't just affect themselves, they affect others. And human services are provided to help the individual as well as the others affected by these problems. Okay, then what are some of these problems? You might think of them as just problems in living, problems in getting by. There are problems within a family. There are problems with getting work or keeping work. There's problems with accessing education and succeeding in education. Very simply, problems paying bills. Problems with changes that are happening in our lives, and problems with substance abuse or abuse in general, problems with friendships, and problems even as a person changes over his or her own life, and so many more that we haven't even listed. There are problems in the modern world in which we live, which let's say we can think of as the latter part of the 20th century, problems that are different from what our great grandparents might have seen. Well, what has changed? Communities have changed. People may have lived in a community where they knew everyone and their grandparents knew everyone. Now we live among strangers. Family structures have changed. People used to live with extended family and all their aunts and uncles all around them. People often find themselves living just alone or with their own immediate family. Definitely jobs have changed. People used to work on farms, then they used to work in factories. Now there are jobs, those jobs have disappeared, and the new jobs people are not often skilled to receive. Problems have changed because of technology. Everything, how we communicate, the problems that generates, technology has changed everything in our lives and changed it very quickly. Changes in where people get their supports. People got their supports from their family, their church, their house of worship. People may not have those available or do not use them the same way. So what kinds of human services, social services are there? There are a lot. Well, let's start with there are actual government agencies, members of the federal government, the state government, your city government. One example would be the Department of Transitional Assistance. Then there are the private not-for-profit organizations. You may have heard of many of these: ABCD, Dorchester House Catholic Charities. There's many of them. There are also private for-profit organizations, such as a number of the drug treatment centers that have come up. Almost all of the private, not-profit and for-profit, get government funding and or insurance to be able to offer their services. So even if it's not a government agency, it's still very involved with the government. And that means that these organizations have to meet a lot of government regulations. For instance, non-discriminations. Catholic Charities has to serve everybody, not just Catholics, for a very simple example. Sadly, when a person decides to find help, there's no simple path to finding that help. The human services are a network, a big mishmash, a maze of different delivery systems. There are many related programs that might work to serve a certain problem. Some program services are what you might call outpatient. That means a person will come in for an appointment or they will walk in to look for help. Other programs are residential. The person lives there, such as a treatment center or community residences for people with disabilities. Then there's also self-help programs, and AA may be the most famous of those. So there are so many programs that people have huge choices among them, but what is stopping people from getting help? You can think of it as internal blocks and external blocks to getting help. An internal block means it's something inside the person that is stopping them from getting help. And that is normal, and we are all at times experience this. It may simply be embarrassed to go to a food pantry, to go to a mental health counselor. They may be afraid. There's many reasons people can be afraid. A woman facing domestic violence may be too afraid of her partner to go to a domestic violence program. A person who is not documented, an immigrant without paperwork, may be afraid that if he or she goes to a social service agency, the government will get involved and they could be deported. There can certainly be strong distrust of any sort of service. Who are these people? They don't know me. They don't know my culture. They think there's something wrong with me. I don't want them in my life. And of course, you could be in denial that there is a problem. It's drinking, but I have it under control. All kids behave this way. I can handle this on my own. Denial is a very normal part of the human experience. And then there are external things outside the individual that will stop him or her from getting help. It's a confusing system. You try to apply for a service and they send you to another one, and that tells you you need to do that first. It's very, very confusing. Often people don't even know how to find help, and when they do find it, they can't figure out how to apply for it. Or they may not be eligible. As we'll look later on in the course, eligibility guidelines, particularly income, are brutal, and people can be very poor and still be considered over income for services. And then, of course, there's paperwork, which is increasingly online now and requires Frankly, it requires multiple degrees to figure out how to do it. All of these are reasons for people to get lost in the system or not even try. And then sometimes the resources just aren't there, particularly outside of the big cities. A person needing, say, mental health services, that resource might be 50 miles away. There's may not even be a service to help the people. Which leads us to a main role of most human service workers, which is case management. Often, whatever your title is, you're going to be doing some degree of case management. And the way to explain it is people don't usually just have one problem on their own. A problem consists of multiple problems. So a person might have a need for housing. They may also be experiencing a mental health issue, either besides the housing or the depression and stress brought on by not having adequate housing. They probably have a very low income because they cannot afford housing. If they have children, the housing issue, the stress, the poverty may very well be impacting how the children are behaving. So people have multiple problems, but the services to help these problems are spread out all over the place, and they don't even talk to each other. Even just trying to help a person with one problem, say housing, involves working with multiple agencies across the state. And multiple people are addressing this segment of the need, but they're not talking to each other. They're each doing their own thing. And that is where case management is critical. So let's think of what would be called the client and the helper, or let's use the terms helpee and help her, because client, while originally it was meant to be a more respectful way to talk about the individual, has now come to feel a little insulting. So there's the person seeking help and the person doing the helping. The most important thing that I hope you will get from this entire course, as the helper, the human service professional, your job is to help the person to help himself or herself, not to solve the problem for them, but to help the person to be able to help themselves. In order to do that, you need to focus on the whole person and not just what's called the presenting problem, which means a person isn't home. Well, they may not have a home, but they are not just homelessness. A person is more than their problem. A person has a history, a person has friends, family, supports, skills. Certainly they have problems, but they're more than just their problem. And a helper needs to be aware of the person's culture. We come from many different cultures. No matter how society lumps people in groups, within each group there are many cultures. And the helper will very likely not always share the same culture as the person seeking help. That's okay. The role of the helper is to be humble enough to acknowledge that there are different cultures and to be open to learning from the individual, him or herself, about these cultures. And it's about building relationships. A person cannot trust the helper, a person cannot take risks, a person is not going to feel better about themselves if they are not in a respectful and supportive relationship. And finally, this is a really key point we'll come to often. This relationship needs to be based on strengths. It is the individual's strengths that are going to help them solve their problems. And too often the helping professions don't think about the person's strengths. They only think about what's wrong with them. But everyone has strengths, and that's what's going to help them. It's important to think about and to understand what makes up the environment of the person who is seeking help, to try to understand someone else's world, to help with their own skills in solving their problems. Obviously, basic needs have to be met first. Certainly a person can get access to English classes or job skills training or family counseling, but if they're starving, that's not going to help. People need food first. They need a safe, secure place to live first, but that's not enough. But it's important that these basic needs be addressed in order for the person to begin doing their own problem solving, in order to make changes and to find resources to help them make these changes. The human services consists of networking, teams, and partnerships. You, the helper, are not going to solve the person's problem on your own. It's very tempting to think of yourself as the great savior. You're going to come in, the person's problems will all be solved. Doesn't work that way. Your job is to help that individual access the resources to help address the problem. And there's resources all over the place. So, what is the difference between networking, teams, and partnerships? In networking, you are building contacts and relationships with other human service workers and with public agencies, so you can share information, access services, and support clients. You're intentionally working with other groups to help the person, because other human service workers have the insider knowledge about their programs. They can help you bypass some of these roadblocks to access services. When you can call someone in an organization and ask how your individual that you're serving can get help, they can help you get past it. You give support to these other services, and you will get support from these other services. There's the teams approach, where a group of human service professionals intentionally work together to assist a particular individual. So they basically will form a group to bring together their different skills, experiences, and knowledge. For instance, a child having behavioral problem at school, you might be bringing in the teacher, a mental health counselor, a family therapist, somebody working with the family on housing issues, so that everybody working with the family and the group talk to each other, and most importantly, together they are talking with the family, the adults, and the children involved. They share their information and they coordinate their efforts. That means they don't just do one thing and no one else knows about it. They agree together, and most importantly, with the people being served, on how they're going to move forward. And it's what's called a wrap-around approach, which means all the different issues are being addressed. The child having trouble in school is also being helped when the family is getting help finding housing and the parent is finding job training. and the siblings are getting mental health counseling, whatever it is, the entire group are getting all the different services they need, and they're talking to each other about them. And then there's partnerships, which are a more formal agreement when two or more human service agencies formally agree that they will work together towards common goals. It's the best way to use their financial resources, of course, coordination of services, and very frankly, you will see that government funders really want to encourage different human services to formally work together.